Welcome to the post-2021 budget media briefing. My name is Mashudu Masuta Ramute, and I'll be moderating this session this afternoon. On the panel with me, I've got the Minister of Finance, Minister Tito Mboweni, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, Director General of the National Treasury, Mr. Dondo Mokgajane, Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Mr. Lesicha Kganyago, and Commissioner of SARS, Mr. Edward Kesvetter. Just to go through a few house rules, colleagues, there is the Q&A, which you can use to pose all your questions to all the panelists that have joined us here today, as well as the chat. So we'll be moving between the chat and the Q&A. And should you want to ask a direct question, you can put up your hand and we will enable you to speak. Because at this moment, we've only got the panelists who've got access to speak at the stage. But once you want to ask a question, we can allow you to do so. And on the line as well, I've got National Treasury officials who will be assisting the panel with some of the questions that will be posed today. Thank you very much once again for joining us this afternoon for the 2021 budget speech media briefing. So if I can start already, I can see the questions are starting to roll in. The first one is from Ina Opperman. How do you justify spending even more money on SAA while having to cut grants?
Is that a question to me?
Yes, Governor.
Okay. Well, there's no allocation in this budget for SAA. And we have not cut social grants. So the question doesn't apply really. Now we've said that SAA has made a request of rather the business rescue practitioner has made a request of some 3.5 billion rand. That still has to be interrogated to check the veracity of the request. And as such, the answer to your question is that we have not come to that stage yet. But in this budget, in year, there's no provision for SAA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. We've also got a question from Miriam Issa. She's from Finway. Can you tell us whether you will decrease the amounts sold at weekly bond auctions and by how much? I think our colleague Tshepiso Moahloli is on the line. Should be able to assist us with that question.
Yes, I mean, all depends on the program that we're going to put in place. I mean, there's a program that the asset and liability management folks normally follow, and depending on how they spread out the auctions, that will depend on that. But I can hand over to Tshepiso, who is an expert on this matter. Tshepiso. No. Tshepiso. Okay, we'll come back to Tshepiso, but for now, I think that's the preliminary answer I can give you, unless if Governor Kganyago wants to say anything more educated than what I've said. No. Okay.
Thank you very much, Minister. We've got another question from Heidi Jokos. She's from ENCA. Please explain to us if Eskom has gotten new money allocated in this budget.
Gigi? Unmute.
Thank you very much. We've increased the expenditure ceiling. Essentially, what we are doing is to make provision for the vaccine in particular, and the pressure that comes with that. So yes, but what we are doing, we're also trying to make sure that as we do that, as we said this afternoon, we want to do that in a very responsible manner, in a way that we recognize that debt is maintained at particular levels, 88.5%, as we said in 24-25, and we also want to ensure that we boost productive sectors of the economy, as you said. So yes, but essentially for vaccine rollout. Thanks.
Thank you very much, DG.
There was another question too about whether there's been any allocation to ESCOM in here. Now, DG might wish to deal with that, or Tshepiso, when she comes on board later, could deal with that. But if you look in the book, in terms of the allocations made, really there's been no substantive request from ESCOM, so I think there should be no misunderstanding there.
Thank you very much, Minister. We've also got another question from Thando Maeko. She's addressing this question to Treasury officials. Why has the Treasury and the DPE been chosen to pilot the zero-based budgeting approach?
Mampho?
Thanks, Minister. I hope you can hear me. Basically, we just chose the National Treasury and DPE because they are not too big of departments, and we think that piloting in smaller departments will give us enough ammunition to implement this for the rest of the government. But if you're piloting with the departments such as basic education or home affairs, it's too big of a department and it has a lot of programs, so the pilot might take longer than what we want. So the choice of these two departments is that they're small enough for us to actually test the spending review process and the ZBB process so that we can implement for the rest of government. We are aware that looking at these two departments will not give us sufficient information, but I think it's good enough of a first start to implement throughout the whole of government. We are aware that we will need to differentiate between policy department as well as service delivery departments, but we think these two will give us enough ammunition to see whether we can be successful in implementing ZBB across the state.
Thank you very much, Mampho. We've also got a question from Janice Roberts from Money Market. You have penciled in an increase in grants below inflation, which seems politically challenging. Why have you done this, and what are the chances of this being revised into a larger increase?
Mampho,
Thanks, Minister. So basically, when we looked at the overall fiscal consolidation, we couldn't really protect the social grants. If you look at the past budget reductions since 2012, we did the best that we could to protect the social grants, but now the amount of consolidation that was required was much more than what we could basically protect the social grants. So it is, yes, we agree, it is below inflation, but remember, these are the years where we really have to consolidate. To review the social grants, we will have to do it at a point where the fiscal or the debt trajectory is now more stable. But if we look at the increases, at least there's still an increase. So we did try to make sure that there is some increase in the social grants rather than not increasing the nominal value at all. But we are faced with the challenge of fiscal consolidation. And because of the magnitude of the budget consolidation that we needed, we couldn't protect social services. So the increases that you see, yes, we agree they're small, but at least there is an increase in the social grants. And once we have the debt, as I said, once we have the debt under control, we can consider firstly, how do we then going forward look at social grants? But this is purely because we needed fiscal consolidation. And as you would have seen in the numbers, our debt trajectory was not looking so well.
Now, the political answer to that is that there's no need to be apologetic about it. There's no need to be apologetic. There is no social contract that says every year there must be X amount increase. So there's no need to be apologetic at all. And that's the allocations that were made is what we could afford. Overall, I mean, if you look at social services, they occupy about 56% of the allocations. That's quite substantial in a country like ours, given the nature of the budget. So no, there's nothing to be apologetic about. No, there isn't. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'll just quickly go to the chat. This one is from Mfuneko Toyana. What is the status of talks over a loan from the World Bank?
The conversations with the World Bank have to do with the fact that we had set ourselves a target of plus minus $7 billion for our borrowings from the international financial institutions, i.e. the BRICS Bank, the African Development Bank, the IMF, and the World Bank. The conversations with the World Bank were initially very difficult and were bordering on the imposition of conditionalities. As you know, we're very allergic to conditionalities and therefore could not accede to their conditions, and we had a long conversation, so we had to push back. Eventually, the World Bank had us and began to develop a new stream through which we could access a loan from the bank. So conversations will continue until we reach some understanding. But if we don't, we really have no ex-ante obligation to borrow from the World Bank. But I think we'll probably find each other and in conversations with the World Bank. That's where I can leave it. Mashud.
Thank you very much, Minister. Another question, this is from Carol Payton. The term of the Zondo Commission has been extended. Do you, as the Minister, feel assured that there is enough funding to pay the investigators and the legal team, or is this just left up to the Department of Justice?
Well, thank you very much. We made it very clear when we extended the 63 million rand to the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture that as far as we were concerned, that was the amount that they must use to finish their work and close out and finish. This perpetual extension of the inquiry into state capture, it's not really conducive. They must finish their work. In fact, their work, in my view, is much less than the work that was being done by the Commission of Inquiry into the Public Investment Corporation. And the Commission of Inquiry into the Public Investment Corporation has concluded, and this one just keeps going on and on. It must end at some stage. So unless if DG has anything to say, I don't think I'm going to sign up on another tranche of cash to the State Capture Commission. They must finish their work.
Thank you, Minister.
If they're to proceed, then maybe the Department of Justice has another source.
Yes, I was going to say that. I mean, I was saying currently in the current framework, we don't have any provision for that extension. If there has to be any extension, there has to be reprioritization within the Department of Justice. There are many things that needs to be considered there. The cost of the commission itself. These are things that must be considered. The cost of the lawyers, the daily remuneration costs are things that must be considered. But we will help the department to reprioritize from within the department itself, and not us at this point giving any resources to the commission. Thanks.
This is a pretty long question from Marvin Charles. He's from News 24. So it starts, Minister Mboweni, earlier today in Cape Town, trade unions held demonstrations as you were about to present your budget for the financial year. Their plight ranged from the unemployment rate, which they are concerned about, and they are demanding that government provide a minimum wage of 12,000 Rand. Can you respond to that? Also, in the budget presented on conditional grants, that is, if a province or municipality is not spending its allocated funds or does not comply with the grant conditions, then further transfers can be withheld or reallocated to another recipient. Are you not concerned on what impact this will have on municipalities' financial standing? So it's about two questions in one here we've got, Minister.
The government sets the national minimum wage based on the advice from the Employment Conditions Commission or from the panel of experts. And I think the Minister of Labor is responsible for announcing the determination, which I think he has recently done. So that's the job of the Minister of Labor. I might have been Minister of Labor before, but I'm not responsible for that function now. But the Minister of Labor is responsible for that and has probably announced the new national minimum wage. So protesting to me is not helpful, except to say that maybe to make us aware that there are difficulties in the minimum wage system. I don't mind to have a conversation. It's always good to have a conversation, but that's not my lane. And I didn't see the demonstration because I would have gone to talk to them. On the issue of the municipalities, I think in order to democratize this platform, I'll ask Malijeng Ngqaleni to say something if she wishes to do so, fail of which I might have to ask Dondo or I'll do it myself. Ask Malijeng.
Thank you, Minister. Am I audible?
More than audible.
Okay. So the question has got two parts to it in terms of what we are saying about conditional grants in the book. So the first thing is around the situation where a municipality or a province commits serious or persistent material breach of expenditure control measures. So where we can actually intervene and act in terms of even stopping conditional grants for some time to enforce, to deal with the non-compliance issues. So that is really a measure of, consequence management, if you like, in terms of acting on the failure to implement the norms and standards in financial management. So the second one is around how we deal with non-performance, particularly in-year non-performance. So what municipalities and provinces like the rest of government have is a 3-year indicative 2-year allocations that would actually provide an opportunity for them to actually do proper forward spending, because usually this happens in the context of infrastructure projects. So they are meant to do that. And there is quite a bit of support that also is meant to help them to plan, package their projects, and be in a state of readiness to implement when the year begins. But what you will find is that sometimes it doesn't happen that way for various reasons. They end up indicating that they would be underspending in year. So what departments would do is, instead of losing the money because this province or this municipality will not spend, because if it's underspent, it will have to come back to the revenue fund. So while on the other hand, there is also opportunity in other provinces and local government in the same sector that are actually making progress. So then overall, at least the sector doesn't lose. You can make progress by reallocating to the municipality that is actually making progress. And that, we believe, is also part of an incentive So it's more or less like a carrot and a stick situation where we are saying we support you, but if you don't, then there's a stick for you. Actually, you will lose the money. So we hope that that will actually enable them to do better planning and spend the money. So that's it, Minister. Thank you.
If I may, Mashudu, just to add on what Malijeng has said, there is always the danger in the municipalities that people might create projects through which they loot the grants or the state finances. And I've been warned from time to time that be careful of this or the other grants because it can be looted. Whether it's about infrastructure, municipal infrastructure grant, or whatever it is, because people just sometimes can just create projects, not just in the municipalities. There's a tendency generally for corrupt people to do wrong things. Let me give you an example. I went to an area called Hadzumeri, next to Guyana. I was going to campaign there politically. And the chiefs in the area said, no, you can't campaign here. I thought they were being disrespectful to the Minister of State and the leader of the African National Congress. They said, you can't campaign until you come and sit here and talk to us. So I went there, sat down, spoke to them. They told me about a non-existent road, but an existing bridge. So the contractor built the bridge, constructed the bridge, but forgot to construct the road. The bagger did not forget to construct the road. He stole the money. Who is he? He ate the money. That's what the situation can be. And now I went to see the bridge. I saw it with my own eyes. It exists, but there's no road. So people do create these projects like at Malamulele. There's supposed to be a stadium. Money has been allocated, money is gone, and there's no stadium. So we have to be vigilant, and I think Malijeng is correct. We have to remain vigilant, but really we must assist the municipalities to have the requisite skills to manage their budgets. And in this respect, I think working together with the mayors and so on, we need to appoint suitably qualified municipal managers, appoint after a open recruitment process, financial managers who know how to manage finances, and so on. So there are about 5 key positions in municipalities which require really qualified specialist people in order to get the finances of the municipality going. And of course, the law enforcement agencies must follow on any malfeasance which might be there. I'm sorry I went off tangent a bit, but it's part of an overall package. Thank you, Mashud.
Thank you very much, Minister. There is a question that we asked earlier on in the session and Tshepiso could not answer, and she's online and she'll be able to assist us with that one. It's, can you tell us, Tshepiso, I'm just going to repeat it for you so that you know. Can you tell us whether you will decrease the amount sold at weekly bond auctions and by how much?
Thanks, Mashudu. Yes, thanks, Mashudu. The table 7.2 in the budget indicates the gross borrowing requirement over the medium term. And we can see in 2021, highly elevated gross borrowing requirement, which then subsequently decreases over the medium term. So therefore, the implication is that the weekly bond issuances, including the treasury bills, will also decrease. The treasury bill weekly auction amounts are already published on table 7.3 of the budget. The bond levels will be announced before the first auction in the new financial year, and that will be published through SENS to the markets. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tshepiso. Okay. And then we've got a question from Michelle Gumede from the AFP. The minister had a positive outlook on GDP growth in the 2021-2022. In which areas or sectors is this growth anticipated?
I'm in trouble. So.
All right, we just want to sort out the minister a little bit with his PC. We'll go to Lemizu Maji.
Maybe Duncan can come in.
All right, okay. Thank you very much, DG.
Yes, thank you. I can come in on that question. So I assume the question is about the 2021 growth forecast of 3.3%, which is in fact unchanged from MTBPS, but it does present a significant shift from the minus 7.2 that we are now forecasting for 2020. And the main drivers of that actually are twofold. The one is, while we do expect private household consumption to come down from our MTBPS estimate, it is still positive at 2.9% in 2021, but lower than our MTBPS estimate. And that reflects some pressure on households, both from a wage perspective, but also, of course, the impact of the second wave. The other element that is pushing growth in 2021 is also a recovery in our export volumes, which we saw already start to take shape in 2020. And that was driven both by greater demand for some of our commodities as well as higher prices, which is also reflected in a trade surplus that we are expecting for the first time. So the main drivers of the stronger 2021 number, or the 3.3% relative to the minus 7.2, comes both from household consumption as well as from what we expect on the export side. Of course, there is still quite a lot of uncertainty. We don't know yet what the path of the COVID pandemic will take in 2021, and that certainly does pose a downside risk to that 3.3 that we are expecting for the year. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm covered there. I'm covered there, Mashuli.
Thank you very much, Duncan. Thank you, Minister. We'll go to SAA once again. I think it's a follow-up question from one that was posed a little earlier. If SAA has been allocated the 3.5 billion rand that the business rescue practitioners say they need, are you concerned that the rescue process and the strategic equity partners SAA want to attract will be jeopardized? This question is from Carol Payton.
This budget in year has not made any allocation to SAA. The rest is speculative and must be directed to the Department of Public Enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. A question from Ray Mahlaka. Could Treasury officials talk about Operation Vulindlela? Who are the people that have been appointed to support Deputy Minister David Masondo in Operation Vulindlela? I understand that there are some private sector individuals that are part of the Operation Vulindlela.
Principal, please take it over. DM. DM, are you there? Okay, Duncan.
Yes, thank you, Minister. So, Ray, as you know, Vulindlela is really about prioritizing the structural reforms that can have the highest impact on growth in the short to medium term, hence the focus on the network industries, in particular electricity, water, transport, and telecommunications. There's a team at the Treasury that is led by Dr. Sean Phillips, who has a core team who works with him of sector experts, and he's also supported by about 10 to 15 Treasury officials across the various divisions who have quite deep sector experience and who work with Dr. Sean Phillips, as well as ourselves in the Economic Policy Division. At the presidency, there's a team led by Mr. Rudy Dix, who's the head of the project management office in the presidency, and he has a team supporting him as well on his side. And we work very closely together as the Treasury and the presidency. We have weekly meetings, and of course, our job is to support the line departments in the implementation of these structural reforms where that support is needed. There are also sector experts that we engage on a reform by reform basis where additional expertise is required. So occasionally we do reach out to sector experts to support the work that we are doing at the Treasury and at the presidency.
It's very important. It's a pity that Deputy Minister is not here. The idea, I mean, when I dreamed up this idea of the Vulindlela unit, it was to have the capacity and the capability to unlock any blockages in the structural reform program, but also to probably assist the government to work more smarter and block where the blockages are, and be solely dedicated to, as we say, Vulindlela, opening the way, sorting out the obstacles along the way. And Duncan is quite correct. In order to support the economic reconstruction and recovery program, we need this dedicated team to help in sorting out these blockages that I'm talking about. I think that's very, very important. And I have a strong suspicion, and I'm not a sangoma, but I have a strong suspicion that the work of the Vulindlela unit is going to expand. I have that suspicion. It's going to expand given the execution capacity and capability. It will expand to include additional support in the economic reconstruction and recovery program. And it might just about become an example of how within the state system we can unlock these blockages. I think it's a very important initiative. I think it was a good dream. And but Vulindlela unit can only function when there is sufficient cooperation in the entire state system. So they do not go to other government departments with any sense of arrogance, but with a sense of cooperation, collegiality, identify the problem and work together to solve those problems. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. There are two questions around the wage bill, and I thought I should just ask them at once so that we can get just one response. The one is from Devin Murugan from ENCA. Does the fact that we have no resolution as yet on wage freezes with the unions affect budget projections? And then there's another one from Lamise Ormaji, she's from Fin24. If discussions with the public sector unions are still ongoing about the next wage deal, why have reductions to public sector wage spent already been included in budget estimates?
I think it's in two parts. The second part I'll ask DG or Mampho to deal with, but the first part is a political one. The point being made here is that there is a new round of negotiations which is going to start. So these matters are going to have to be back to the matters of going forward, not backwards, but forward, have to be negotiated at the Public Service Bargaining Council. And so Minister Ngqaleni will be leading that process. And so the political answer to the question is, yes, there has to be conversations. I was Minister of Labor before. I know exactly how you go about the negotiations process. You do not rely solely on the bargaining council. A lot of the work, actually, which then eventually ends up at the bargaining council, is done outside. And conversations which happen, which eventually lead to the formalization of the agreements in the official structure. So I know that there are other people who say there are no conversations taking place. The fact that you don't know that people are talking to each other doesn't mean that talking is not taking place. And so therefore the point needs to be made that conversations have to continue in one way or the other, whether in the lift, whether over dinner, whether by cell phone or whatever the case. There's conversations all the time. In the nature of labor relations, you never close down the channel for communications. And you don't talk to everybody at the same time, obviously, because everybody will meet at the bargaining council. And it's not divide and rule at all. You just to have an open approach to conversations. But DG, you might wish to deal with the second part of the question.
Thanks, Minister. Lamis, I think that budgeting is a science. Many people can agree and understand it differently. But at some point, that compensation budgets line item in the budget must be, a number must be there. Now, we've done this for the past 20 years, if I remember, even long before that. There's always been estimates. Medium-term expenditure estimates will have certain assumptions in them, whether it's inflation, whether it's stagnant kind of growth in averages over time. But however, that in itself does not dictate the term of what's going to happen in the Public Service Bargaining Council. It's an intention based on the realities and the negotiations and the veracity of the engagements and the negotiations of the bargaining council, then that number changes. So, and again, the current, the recent court ruling, indicated that we have got a certain particular role as Treasury, and we have to articulate it as such in terms of affordability and in terms of what is available in the coffers of the state. Now, that also is a factor that we'll have to present in negotiations. So it doesn't mean by putting a number over the medium term, then we have already decided on the negotiations. We would have issued an intent. And that's why I was going to say to you that a budget is a statement of intent, or it's a statement of political intent. It's a statement of estimate. You can explain it in many, many ways. But in this particular instances, all we are saying is that there has to be a number. Negotiations can give us a lower, same number or a higher number. And at that time, we'll obviously have to deal with it based on the realities. And the recent court judgment, as I said, is a good indicator of what exactly our position is on some of these things and what we should be considering in whether to give a higher or a higher than inflation or an inflation or a lower than inflation rate increase. So I think that in a way suffices in terms of the question that you asked, Lamis. Thank you. Thanks, Leo. Thanks.
Thank you very much, DG. The Deputy Minister is on the line now, and he can respond or say a few words about Operation Vulindlela. DM, I don't know whether you want me to repeat the question for you or you just want to say something about the unit. Thanks.
Principal, are you there?
DM, are you there?
There he is.
Oh, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
No, I was saying that the Operation Vulindlela, as set up by the minister, is meant to deal with the structural constraints in our economy, which range from, largely the network industries, electricity, telecommunication, water, as well as skills, because part of the reason why our economy has not been growing, it's the underperformance of our network industry, but there are also other policy constraints in those industries that are making it difficult for the potential of our economy to be realized. So we do have a unit. It's politically headed by myself, Sean Phillips, who used to work at Dr. Sean Phillips, who used to work at the DBSA, has been seconded to the unit. Colleagues from National Treasury, Duncan, who heads our Economic Policy Division, is part of it. But the presidency, they've also seconded some of the officials, largely from the PMO, who are working with us in opening the way, basically dealing with the structural constraints on our economy. And I'm not so sure if you had said something, Duncan. If you don't mind, you can add to what I've said.
No, it did, and I also went ad infinitum or ad nauseum talking about it, but we thought it would be important that you come on board as well. Yeah, we've spoken, the two of us. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister and Minister. We are coming to the end of our press conference, so I'll touch on a few questions so that we can wrap up at 5 o'clock rather exactly. So we've got a question from Laura Gardner. She's from DebtWire. Could you provide more details on the disbursement timeline and conditions for the 7 billion rand to Land Bank? Could you update us on Eskom debt restructuring talks, including plans to transfer about 100 billion to be overseen by the PIC? Thank you.
Tshepiso, how to?
Thank you, Minister. On Land Bank, the distribution of the 7 billion over the 3 years is 5 billion rands in the first year, 1 billion respectively in the 2 outer years. So that would make the 7 billion. And in terms of the restructuring of Eskom, Eskom is an entity that issues debt. I don't understand the question, and it always comes, Minister, where there's an understanding that another entity can actually come and restructure another entity's debt. That is within the jurisdiction of Eskom. PIC also has a board, has management, and they also have GPF who gives them mandate in terms of the investments that they need to undertake. So there are governance processes that each entity would need to follow in order for anything to be done. It's not up to the Treasury to restructure the debt of Eskom. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tshepiso. A question from Suren Naidu. On the 9 billion rand allocation for the COVID-19 vaccine rollout, I see it is for the medium-term basis, but Treasury estimates that overall funding could reach 19.3 billion rand. Will the 10 billion rand now allocated for vaccines cover the health minister's targets of having 67% of the population vaccinated over the next 12 months?
Let me deal with that question because, again, it's a political question more than a financial question. The Department of Health is responsible for determining the health needs of the country. And then in conversation between the Department of Health and the National Treasury, but also the conversation between the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Health, certain understandings emerge which will support the rollout and other things. Let me give an example. I'm sure you saw in the text of my speech that we're having to, for example, set up a fund that these pharmaceutical companies are insisting on. In a sense, it's a kind of no liability type fund in case something wrong happens. So that's a matter that the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Health must deal with. And similarly, the DG of the National Treasury and the DG of the National Department of Health must deal with. Now, but we have made it very clear that the struggle against COVID-19 is a real struggle. It's a life and death struggle. And therefore, to the extent possible, should the third wave or fourth wave emerge, we'll have to pull the resources of the state together in order to fight this new enemy. And there's no time for small politics here and there. It's a war situation. So in relation to the vaccines, whether it's from one pharmaceutical company or the other, in coordination between the Department of Health and the National Treasury, but also between the two ministers, will work and together with the technical teams to see what to do. But I see Mampho wants to say something, so maybe you should let her speak. But after Mampho, before you close, I think somebody should ask the governor of this African Reserve Bank, the 10th one, what the feeling is in the bank about the monetary policy, fiscal policy mix. What do all of these things mean? I think it's very important. We have the governor here. No. Very important person.
Number 8, there is a question. There is a question in the chat room.
I think he should say something.
There's a question in the chat room.
Okay. Mashoud, there's a question in the chat room.
Thank you very much, Governor and Minister. I thought maybe Mampho could respond to the vaccine question, and then we can then go to the question that the Governor will respond to. Thank you. Mampho?
Thanks, Mashoud. So all I wanted to say was that the money that has been allocated, we did work with the Department of Health, and it's their required funding. So what we have done is to manage potential underspending and the distribution of money within the 3 years that we're looking at the vaccine program. We will put some of the money in the contingency reserve such that every time when health requires additional funding, it's easy for us to allocate the additional funding for them. So what we have put in the framework and in the budget review is a consolidated amount that we worked between us and the Department of Health, and we think it's sufficient. However, if there is a need, for example, for 2020-21, there was a need for the Department of Health to enter into bilateral agreements with the suppliers. Therefore, we allocated 1.1 additional for this year, ending at the 31st of March. So the money that you see in the fiscal framework is not the total amount. This is just given the methodology and the calculations by both National Treasury and the Department of Health. This is what we think is sufficient. However, if we need additional funding, we will definitely use part of the contingency reserve to fund the vaccines. Thanks, Mashudu.
Thank you very much, Mampho. A question in the chat, this is from Funeko Toyana. Can NT explain what dangers it sees from local banks holding too much government debt? Was this part of the reason for lowering local issuance? I'm not sure, Governor, if this is the question that you saw in the chat that you'd like to respond to.
Yes, that's the question, but can the Treasury start with the last part of that presentation, and then I'll deal with the banking side.
Thank you, Governor. I can start. With the non-residents selling a significant portion of the holdings of the local currency debt, from the highs of 41% to about 29.9%. We have seen domestic banks, especially of this year, significantly increasing their holdings from 16.7% to about 22%, and other financial institutions from about 14% to about 17.6%. And obviously, when we consider, the absorptive capacity of the sector, we're not just looking at the banks. I mean, banks are only holding about 6.6 trillion of asset under management, while the non-banking sector is holding about 10 trillion. So it's quite significant, even what is in the non-banking sector. But having said that, I think we have seen the strain in the whole market in terms of their absorptive capacity. There are regulatory limits, especially with the banks and also asset managers, in terms of how much they can hold in various asset classes. And all that would then contribute to the mix of debt. I mean, we've prided ourselves having very deep and liquid capital markets, but with the significant gross borrowing requirements over the years, that is not sustainable even for a deep and liquid financial market. So that is a consideration broadly, not just for the banks, but just for the overall savings in the country, given that the external savings that have assisted us in the past are declining at this moment. So I'll hand over to the governor. He can speak about the banking sovereign debt systemic risk nexus that he's seeing from the sub-side. Thanks.
Thanks, Tshepi, and thanks to Governor number 8, and congratulations on a very bold budget. I would like to address the question on two fronts. I will first take a macro stance, which is where number 8 and myself spent a lot of time interacting, talking about the interaction between fiscal and monetary policy and what it means for the broader economy in South Africa. And then secondly, I would like to address it from a perspective of where the rubber really hits the road with respect to fiscal and monetary policy, and that is the interaction between monetary policy and the government's borrowing activities. Deficit for the fiscal year that ends the 31st of March would be 14%. Last year, we thought at the time of the MTBPS, it was around 15% or just north of that. What that meant was that government was borrowing the entire savings generated in this economy in 1 year, leaving nothing for everybody. And that raises the cost of capital across the economy. We can take this further and say that we had actually seen that in the period of the 90s, late 90s, through into the 2000s, when the public debt was on a decline, gross fixed capital formation was on the rise. Fast forward to 2018, 2019, government's borrowing exceeded what we had seen as growth in gross fixed capital formation. Put simply, the rise in government debt crowded out private investment. And that is the macro price that this economy had been paying. And so don't cry and say the economy is not growing, because the savings that were available were consumed by the government. What this fiscal framework has done with the government's borrowing requirement declining is to relieve that constraint. So the savings investment constraint is relieved. So that relief, you are not just seeing it with the fiscal stance, you also see it in the external accounts, because we are running a current account surplus. And so that helps to alleviate the macro constraint. So from a macroeconomic perspective, the fiscal consolidation is releasing the much needed savings in the economy for investment. And secondly, it reduces the cost of capital because government is the most credit-worthy of the borrowers in this economy. And because of that, what you then see is that the surplus sectors of the economy would tend to first lend to government before they lend to everybody else. So as government brings down its borrowing requirement, it releases the surplus sectors of the economy to invest elsewhere in the economy. That is the big macro interaction that you actually see. And that picture is also reflected in the sense that we have seen that the rise in government borrowing was accompanied by a decline in the issuance of corporate bonds. And so that is what it was thus reflecting. Now, if we take this to the interaction with the bond market and what we then see there and the role of the banks and what this actually means for the sovereign banking nexus, we see the following. The international standard in banking regulation is Basel III. And the Basel III capital standard and the liquidity standards interact to create a safer banking system. The most important one for the purpose of this question is the liquidity standard called the liquidity coverage ratio. And that liquidity coverage ratio means that the banks must be able to cover their obligations on average over a period of 30 days through high quality liquid assets. Those high quality liquid assets are thus defined as government bonds and government treasury bills. Now, in the period in 2011, as we were introducing the liquidity coverage ratio, the South African banks couldn't comply with the liquidity coverage ratio. And the reason that could not happen was because the South African treasury was running such a tight fiscal ship. And as such, there weren't bonds for the banks to meet the liquidity coverage ratio. What you have since seen was that with the rise in government's borrowing requirement, the banks were able to meet the liquidity coverage ratio. That coverage must be 100%. But over the past 3 years, what we have seen is that the banks have gone above that 100%. The treasury had benefited from that. But the problem is that if that situation continues, the banks would rather lend to the government rather than lend for productive activities. And that would be the concern that we would have. And so you will find that the team at the Treasury and the team at the Reserve Bank, through the Standing Committee on Banking and Financial Markets, spent a lot of time coordinating the government's borrowing activities and the Reserve Bank monetary operations so that you do not have a conflict of objectives. And I hope that that deals with your question, that the concern is a macroeconomic issue of crowding out, and that is correct, that government had to consolidate, but also the coordination of monetary and fiscal activities through the government's borrowing activities and the SAP's liquidity management operations.
Thank you very much, Governor Kganyago. We will just take one last question and then we close off the press conference. And this is directed to the Commissioner of SARS, Mr. Edward Kisvetter. The improved fiscal outlook is largely as a result of improved revenue and lower borrowing. Do you expect this trend to be sustained? And the question is from Carol Payton. Thanks, Commissioner.
So thank you. So I think, first of all, the fiscal framework is understandably not the domain of SARS completely. But I think it has to be recognized that the more efficient and effective revenue collection is, government can sustain its expenditure largely from an increased level of tax revenues. And that is really our aim. As to its sustainability, revenue collection is a function, firstly, of the health of the economy. And so when the economy is in decline, as we see now, when a year ago the minister announced the 1.425 trillion, he based that on a nominal expansion of the economy of 5.1. We've had more than 12% swing with a contraction of minus 7.2. So that clearly has an impact on the low revenue, and that'll always have some level of relationship. But there are two very important factors that gives effect to the final revenue collection. The one is the level of confidence that taxpayers have in the system of government, including SARS. And we know that when there's high levels of inefficiency and high levels of corruption, the public feel morally justified to fiddle with their taxes, and we have a declining tax morality problem. The other important factor is the capability of SARS to administer its laws. In that regard, the rebuilding program of SARS, with the welcome addition of the 3 billion that the minister announced today, begins to build for the restoration of SARS, specifically in a number of areas. Firstly, to supplement it with the correct skills competencies in areas where we believe there's abuse, such as base erosion, the abuse of assessed losses, transfer pricing practices on what I call white-collar crime. Secondly, we find in trade mispricing and under-declaration, so we need better valuation skills. And thirdly, the criminal economy is the only economy that is expanding at a rapid rate. And so that is a huge concern. And so we also, in addition to building our technical competence, we have announced through the minister's statement today that we will expand and increase the use of data. Today, we cannot run an effective SARS without a full command of the analysis and the predictive capability that data allows us, using machine learning algorithms and artificial intelligence, and then increasingly building efficient end-to-end technology platforms on which we administer it. So that's really our program. We believe if we do that well, then at least from the administrative capacity, we will develop a sustainable path to revenue growth, and then we feed off a healthy economy to ultimately supply government its revenue requirement and reduce the cost of borrowing, and that then overall, from a revenue perspective, strengthens the fiscal framework.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. On that note, I'd like to end this media briefing. I'd like to say a big thank you to our panelists this afternoon, the Minister of Finance, Mr. Tito Mboweni, the Deputy Minister of Finance, Dr. David Masondo, Director General of the National Treasury, Mr. Dondo Mokgajane, Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Mr. Lesitja Kganyago, and the Commissioner of SARS, Mr. Edward Kispeter. A big thank you to all those at home and members of the media who joined us on this media briefing, the 2021 budget post-budget media briefing. My name is Mashudu Masuta Rammutle. Thank you very much and good evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, Mashudu.
Thanks, Commissioner. Bye.
I'm not convinced.